Hi, welcome to Splash and Go. Nate Ryan here with Dustin Long, the editor of NASCAR Talk. And Dustin, you had a story after the New Hampshire race about the playoff bubble drivers. Trouble for some of them, particularly Jimmie Johnson. He had his second consecutive finish outside the top 30. Now has fallen below the cut line by 17 points. Here's what he had to say to Dave Burns after the race.
We've been trying all year. It's not like we can just magically flip a switch and all of a sudden have more. We've been able to run the top five, and we need to get back to doing that is really what it boils down to.
Dustin, that's probably about as despondent as we've heard Jimmie Johnson talk about his championship hopes. I don't think it's over for them with 6 races left here in the regular season, but can this team win and still get in the playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, I think about what Kyle Petty said on NASCAR America the other night, just about how he just had not heard Jimmie Johnson sound like that. And I remember watching it and thinking the same thing. Is just like, wow, I mean, Jimmie Johnson almost sounds defeated at this point. Again, it was a rough day. Can they make the playoffs with the win? I don't think so. And I think the bigger issue is if they even get in the playoffs, I mean, is he really a title contender, or is he taking up a space of the 16? Now, again, I understand if you're one of the 16, you have an opportunity to win the championship. You think back to, I think back to 2011 and compare what Tony Stewart did in that year. And obviously, Stewart had his struggles, and I looked it up. Stewart was averaging average finish of 14.3 after 20 races. Jimmie Johnson's average finish is 15.1, so kind of on par with that. Then we saw Tony, again, Tony, I think back to even August of that year where he said after Michigan, look, if we're going to run like this, we're going to take up somebody's space. We don't need to be in the playoffs, and then goes on that fantastic run. So I see some of the numbers similar, but I just don't see that get up and go out of that team that can put something together. Now, I wasn't forecasting Tony Stewart was going to win the championship.
Yeah, well, I think if you're looking for similarities, it would be that year Tony Stewart was saying, we can't flip the switch. Yeah. We can't just turn it on. Much like we heard Jimmie Johnson tell Dave Burns, he's saying, well, we've been trying as hard as we can all season. We can't just flip the switch. Tony Stewart did and won 5 of the last 10 races. So maybe that would be the rallying cry for Jimmie Johnson.
Well, and I think one of the things that I go back to and you think back to that is Stewart's team found something in a test session that really kind of helped him up the last part of the season, because there was, there weren't the limits on testing as there are now. So that's not really an option for Jimmie Johnson's team. So now, how do you suddenly get better when you're not getting better on the track? You're not getting that consistent performance. I mean, look, like I said, even if he makes the playoffs, he's not shown, that team is not shown to be consistent enough to get through any of the 3 rounds and even get to Miami to be a championship contender. Jimmie Johnson and the 48 team, they are about championships. They are not about backing their way in the playoffs or being the 16th seed. This is not them. And again, I understand, if you want to win the championship, you've got to be there, but I'd almost wonder if they're going to go in 16th, if they'd just rather be, hey, let's just not even take up somebody's space in that sense. I mean, I've not seen it yet, and time is running out. And when I look at the tracks coming up, I don't see them winning races. And especially with how concerned they're going to have to be about points, I don't think they can make those gambles to go for the wins.
Well, another driver who I think we know now has to win, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., had the contact with Erik Jones, caused him to crash. He is now very much outside the cut line, 77 points behind in 20th place. At this point, he's got to win one of the last 6 races of the year.
If he doesn't win Bristol, he's done. I mean,
that's his only hope.
Bristol's his only hope, unless something else bizarre happens. Otherwise, it's bye-bye, Ricky. And, that's just the way it is.
Some better news for Erik Jones and Ryan Newman. Jones certainly shored up his chances of making the playoffs. Now is 28 points above the cut line with the 3rd place at New Hampshire. And Ryan Newman, again, in a backup car, just grits it out and manages to get the top 10 and now firmly above the cut line by 21 points in 15th place.
Well, that's the one thing about Newman, too, is that's 5 top 10s in the last 6 races, but it's the 2nd consecutive week he's gotten a top 10 after starting at the rear. Remember, at Kentucky, he had to start at the rear because of a inspection issue. So he's had to, he is truly the grinder in the series. And my question is, can they continue to grind and grind and grind, or is it a case that now what you're going to see is some of these efforts they've been able to grind out a top 10, now they aren't going to be able to, and instead of getting that top 10 finish, now they're going to be 20th, and they're going to start losing points. This great run that they've made, They've not done it on speed. They've done it on tenacity and grit, and in some cases Newman carrying the car. Can that continue? Everybody talks about how tough passing is. Obviously, he's found a way to make it work. But I just wonder, can they continue to do this? And if they continue to grind it out, again, what kind of a title threat are they? Because have they just worn themselves out and just beat themselves down just to get into the playoffs?
And what do you think of Jones? I mean, he gets a third place. He's got 6 top 10s in the last 9 races. They're starting to talk as if he's coming back to JGR. He said he had a positive meeting with owner Joe Gibbs last week. Does it feel like that team is kind of the opposite of Newman, and that they're surging into the playoffs, and maybe they will get the win that will make them a championship contender?
Yeah, I mean, this is the team that you think, hey, this is of those guys that are trying to fight their way into the playoffs, this is the team that could win and get in at this point. You look at the success of Joe Gibbs Racing, you look at his teammates, you look at what he's done lately, like you've talked about now, is back-to-back third-place finishes. They're putting themselves in good positions, and everything's going right. This is the team that, as of right now, obviously still 6 races to go, so still a long time, but this is the team that's like, is this the one that's building momentum to, they had a tough beginning of the year. Is this the team that builds momentum to build into the playoffs, and then in the playoffs they become a mover and shaker and make some noise? So, right now things are trending up, and I like what I see out of this group. But again, 6 weeks is still a long time before we get to the playoffs.
Finally, let's talk driver on the cut line. Clint Bowyer, kind of a statistical anomaly here, Dustin. He loses positions in the standings, but he actually gains points on the cut line. He goes from being 10 points above the cut line to now he's 17 points above Jimmie Johnson in the 16th and last spot where Clint Bowyer is right now. So where do you think that team is? And with Stewart Haas getting that first win with Kevin Harvick at New Hampshire, does that bode well for his teammate Bowyer?
Well, it bodes well, but also, you think about Daniel Suarez has the same number of points as Jimmie Johnson, so Suarez is 17 points back. So Bowyer he's racing a teammate. So you've got that dynamic as well, is how are you going to race a teammate, how much information, the questions of how much information is going to be shared and this and that. And obviously the teams will say, hey, they're sharing everything and so forth. But Bowyer, nice finish at this past week at New Hampshire, but one race doesn't cure all the ills. And can they, horrible June, beginning of July was awful. Can they build some momentum? And can they build on this? And if not, then maybe Suarez or Johnson takes that spot. I think there's a lot there, and Clint's got an uphill climb, no doubt about it, even in that last spot. I want to see what that team does, but I think what's going to be interesting is he is going to be racing a teammate potentially for that last spot. Some
questions there about how that will be handled, and perhaps Clint Bowyer will answer some of those questions on NASCAR America Motor Mouths Wednesday, 5 p.m. on NBCSN. Clint Bowyer, our guest this week. Thanks for watching Splash and Go.
Hey Motorsports fans, thanks for watching. Make sure you hit subscribe before you go for all the latest news and highlights across motorsports.